Hello guys, welcome back to Archangel RC in continuation of my attempts to distract you from the ridiculousness of the world's current state. I would like to introduce you to the Reptile Dragon today, although I assume it won't be an introduction for most of you, as I've certainly taken my time getting this build and flying, and most of you even have it now. But anyway, just like the Sport Cup 500 from my previous video, the Reptile was the other big surprise for me. This thing literally looked like a flying plank with something resembling a tail, and I had absolutely no idea how it was going to fly, so had no real expectations. I assumed it could be a handful, but that's about the extent to which I allowed myself to think of this plane's performance. When I started putting it together, I noticed that a good deal of work has been done in the factory. Even the motors came pre-installed, which was nice, and the fact that somebody had been actually using their head when designing this thing was also obvious. Other than the vertical stabilizer, nothing else needed gluing on this plane, including the wings. On the outermost piece of the wings, there was this screw inside the foam, right where the main spar goes through. This is a brace to grip the spar and prevent it from coming out during flight, which meant that you can pretty much disassemble the plane to its shipping state in a minute or two, and that includes the tail as well, which could be pretty convenient in certain situations. Another thing that definitely piqued my attention was the foam on this model. Right before getting to work on this one, I built the Sonic model binary, and the two models use vastly different foam, which created an interesting contrast. The binary had proper EPO, but very dense, very hard foam that did not even budge when I pressed on it. On the other hand, the Reptile feels softer and not as smooth, but, and this is a big but, its foam is exceptionally flexible and strong. Even a new knife has trouble cutting through it, and I have to be honest, this is the type of foam that I like the most, because this thing can take a beating without much scarring to show for it. Now, there were a few things that could have been improved. For instance, the servos provided with the kit were plastic. This is a very bad idea on something that supposedly can be fast or completely insane to control and very agile, and definitely weighing over 1 kilogram. I don't use plastic servos on planes 600-700 grams and up, let alone on this thing, so they had to go, and in their place I used my trusty Corona DS929 full Metal Gear servos. Of course, this is an issue for the plug-and-play set. You won't be suffering from this if you bought the kit. I did keep the stock motors and ESCs despite being advised to change the motor because the stock was supposedly very weak, but I decided to keep them on and see how they would perform. Next issue was with one of the wings. It just wasn't aligned properly. It was hanging lower than the other wing, but I wasn't sure if that would cause any issues, so left it like that for the time being. But was definitely not happy how it looked, and am definitely curious to find out if other people have observed the same issue on their reptiles, so if you're one of those, please comment below. My other big issue was the lack of a rudder. I've gotten so used to flying planes with rudder, so this was quite weird for me, and when I flew it, I was constantly pulling on the rudder in turns, fully realizing I'm not going to get a reaction. Not sure if a rudder is going to have any effect on such a short body, and not really looking to do the mod to find out, but I definitely missed it, and during turns, and especially in the wind, the plane obviously needs it too. So, other than these three things, the build went on without a hitch and was very quick build too, because there was so little to do. I decided to put in it the guts from the Zocht Dart XL, and that was a mess of wires because it was not one of those Matec wing controllers, but a mini Pix with all of its numerous peripherals. It definitely seemed like this Mary was about to get violated, and soon after, she wasn't a virgin anymore. Took a bit of stuffing, but the job was done. Good thing was that all of the settings and elevon setup from the Dart XL worked perfectly on the Reptile as well, so I really didn't have to change much, only did a throttle calibration on the ESCs at the field, and that was it. I did load in one of them special missions, did set up an auto takeoff too, and was ready to see it in action. I was warned ahead of time that the factory CG location is wrong by about 1 centimeter, so that had to move forward, which I did, but I also did something else. Coming from my experience with flying wings, limited as it is, and how all of them required some up elevator to fly level, for some reason I thought that this plane would need that too, so I dialed in some mechanical up trim ahead of time. Later on, it turned out that this particular plane configuration and design does not need that, so I ended up trimming it neutral, just something to keep in mind if you are building yours now. All of that with the plane being very slightly nose heavy at the CG of 40mm from the leading edge. And so we finally get to the flying bit. The battery for this plane was the same one I used for the Dart XL and the Talon GT, a 4S2P lithium ion pack, and I also decided to use the Firefly 8 SE camera both as a recording camera and as an FPV camera, and I still had to move the battery as far forward as it would go in order to get it to balance at the CG. As usual, I always check the CG before flight, as well as control surface direction, stabilization direction, motors, etc., just to make sure that there will be no surprises or something broken. Of course, I decided to go right ahead with the auto takeoff because this autopilot with these same settings has been tested before on a very similar plane and it had a 100% success rate. So, worked just fine here and the Reptile was off on its maiden flight. Initially, the plane flew very well, but given that the autopilot was stabilizing it, that wasn't too big of a surprise. Also, I really do need to set some larger limits for this one in the fly-by-wire A mode I use most of the time because it is pretty docile right now. Otherwise, it flew level and it seemed good. I was happy with how the autopilot was doing with the Dart XL settings, although I will surely do an auto tune on this one at some point. Next thing I did was to switch to manual mode and see how it will fly, and remember that up trim I had dialed in? Well, it showed right away because as soon as I flipped that switch, the plane jumped up as if it was tail heavy. And it did take a bit of effort to make it fly level in this mode. Now, since at this point I had forgotten about the up trim, I did think it was simply a tail heavy plane and kept flying like this without trimming it out. But then at some later point during the flight I did remember that little detail, trimmed it out, and it flew perfectly thereafter, showing absolutely no signs of being tail heavy, which was a relief because I had no option to add any more weight to the nose, at least not at the field. Shortly after, I got to testing what I test on every new plane I fly, stall tendencies, and actually this is where the Reptile really impressed me. Despite its weird shape and the expectation that will be all over the place and hardly controllable, none of which turned out to be true, trying to get it to tip stall was an absolute failure in every sense of the word. In manual mode, with no stabilization, full up elevator, and it would just parachute down while doing a slight turn with absolutely no indication that it is going to tip stall, and this condition just persisted. This is about as much of a stall as I was able to get, and it wasn't very impressive. Wind would push it around, but it never did tip stall. Trying the same thing with stabilization on yielded the same results, only more stable with less rocking, but the effect was the same. No tip stall to speak of. Overall, flight performance of the plane was pretty impressive actually, especially in manual mode, which is the mode I ended up flying the most in because it was so fun. It was agile and yet quite stable, and knowing it will not stall on me gave me that extra peace of mind. Once trimmed out, it would stay on track and was able to do quite a lot of stuff, which was thrilling also due to the fact that there is nothing glued on it. Tail and wings were held on via some bolts and friction. And the battery, oh that poor 4S2P lithium ion battery pack. It was not prepared for a flight of this type, but this is what it got, and I don't regret it because I had a ton of fun. But in all honesty, a high C rated LiPo battery would do very well on this plane and give it that much needed punch on the verticals, but even with the stock motors and props and the lithium ion battery, it did have a vertical, and I also did see around 100 kilometers on the OSD a few times, though I did not get a chance to fly it via the video link because the tracker was not working for some reason and the video was crappy most of the time due to the highly directional antenna not being pointed at the plane. Not a big deal though, because like I said, I flew it mostly in manual mode and line of sight. For the second flight, I decided to give that mission a go just to make sure all will be good. Sadly, the wind had blown my tracker to the ground, which ended up damaging the antenna, hence why the DVR footage from that flight is awful or non-existent, but I am glad to report that even without a reliable video link, the plane fared well on its own during the mission and the end results were pretty good. What followed was just more of the same fun in manual mode, which can surely be considered an abuse to the battery, but I didn't really care. I loved it. It was so refreshing to be flying a fun and agile plane like this one. Only thing I really was missing was the rudder, especially in these windy conditions. There was a clear need for it, but I doubt it will have any notable effect on such a short body. Apart from that though, I had no other complaints or issues with the way this plane flew and performed. Takeoffs were easy enough, at least with auto takeoff, and landings were nice and controlled too, since it was not prone to stalling too easily. It was good and solid in the air even with all the wind that day, so I was absolutely thrilled by this model, and even more so because it was not what I expected out of it. I was also pretty happy with the Mini Pix controller, did a pretty good job, though granted this one and the Dart XL are sort of similar in weight and size, so I did hope moving it from one to the other would go with little issues, if any. Now, since those flights, I have not had a chance to fly again due to rain, wind or just lack of time, but as soon as the weather improves and I am done with all prior work, I will also fix my antenna and see what the issue was with the tracker air module so I can get it to track the plane, and we'll do a longer range FPV flight just to see how the plane would do with more constant throttle and speed rather than the aggressive aerobatics flying. But from what I saw on the DVR in terms of amp draw, in its current state, this will not be the most efficient plane in my hangar. I did do a coma flight recently, keeping the throttle constant at a level that would allow it to gain altitude, and the flight lasted just under 50 minutes, but granted there was some fun involved and some full throttle runs to see the max speed, which yielded around 120 km going downwind and around 105 km going upwind, but those were just single events. The rest of the flight was in a calm manner, with no small amount of gliding back down after gaining some altitude. And just as a reminder, I am running the stock motors and props, and just as a comparison, with the same gear, the Zohr Dart XL could fly up to 60 minutes with the same battery, so it might just be a tad bit more efficient, although not sure of the top speed with its stock motor, but I think I've seen speeds of a bit over 100 km/h with it, but it's foamy smoother, so it makes sense that it would slide a bit easier through the air. Even so, the Reptile is still an absolute blast to fly and an outstanding plane indeed, and tons more agile than the Dart XL. So seems like there is still a bit more work on this plane, so there will be more videos on it, including some long range testing to the top of the mountain. But until then, links for all items shown and used can be found in the description below, and buying literally anything through them would support this channel at no additional cost to you, and you will have my eternal gratitude as this is my full-time job. Another way you can support me is Patreon, the link is also there, and I would like to say a big thank you to all the people who have supported me so far in any way and would continue to do so. If you have enjoyed this video and found it useful, please feel free to like, share and subscribe if you haven't already, and don't forget to hit that bell button so you can be notified when I upload a new one. Also consider following me on Facebook for more regular updates. Happy and safe flying, and I will see you in the next one.